On a humid Saturday afternoon in July 1997, 6-year-old Emily Harper disappeared from the parking lot of a neighborhood grocery store in Dayton, Ohio. 20 minutes earlier, she had been walking beside her mother, holding a melting orange popsicle in one hand and the strap of her small purple backpack in the other. By the time her mother loaded the last bag of groceries into the trunk and turned around to call her name, Emily was gone. No scream, no dropped candy wrapper, no footsteps running across pavement. Just an empty space between two parked cars where a child had been standing seconds before. The Harper family lived 3 miles away in a quiet block of duplex houses built in the 1960s, the kind of place where porch lights stayed on late and neighbors borrowed sugar without knocking. The kind of place where kids rode bikes in the street until sunset and parents didn't worry too much about locking doors during the day. Fewer than 5,000 people lived within the zip code, one elementary school, one grocery store, one traffic light that blinked yellow after 10 p.m. Nothing about it suggested something like this could happen there. Nothing about it suggested a child could vanish without a single person seeing how. That morning had started like any other. Karen Harper woke at 7:10 a.m., brewed coffee, and opened the kitchen window to let in air that already felt too warm for July. The local radio talked about heat advisories and a chance of late thunderstorms. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room carpet watching cartoons, humming to herself while lining up her stuffed animals in careful rows. She wore denim shorts, white sneakers with Velcro straps, and a bright yellow t-shirt with a cartoon sunflower on the front. Her blonde hair refused to stay tied back. Karen had redone the ponytail twice before giving up. Emily didn't like sitting still long enough to make it neat. At 11:40 a.m., Karen decided to run errands before the afternoon heat got worse. Just the grocery store and the pharmacy. 30 minutes, maybe 40. Emily insisted on coming along. She always did. She liked pushing the small cart and choosing cereal boxes with the biggest pictures. The drive took 6 minutes. The store parking lot was half full. A few pickup trucks, 2 minivans, nothing unusual. Security cameras existed, but only near the front doors. The side rows were uncovered. Karen parked near the cart return, 3rd row from the entrance. Close enough to see the door, far enough to avoid traffic. Inside, everything followed routine. Bread, milk, canned soup, paper towels. Emily asked for popsicles. Karen said yes. At 12:18 p.m., they checked out. The receipt would later confirm the exact time. Outside, the asphalt radiated heat. Karen handed Emily the popsicle to keep her busy while she loaded the trunk. Emily stood near the passenger side door, licking the bright orange ice as it dripped down her fingers. A man walked past, pushing a cart. An older woman searched her purse for keys. Somewhere, a car alarm chirped. Ordinary sounds, nothing that stuck in memory. Karen lifted the last grocery bag into the trunk and reached for the cart. It took maybe 5 seconds, 10 at most. When she turned back, Emily wasn't there. At first, Karen assumed she had climbed into the back seat. She opened the door. Empty. She checked the other side of the car. Nothing. She called Emily's name once, calm, almost casual. Then louder. Still nothing. The popsicle lay on the pavement near the tire, half melted, a small orange puddle spreading slowly across the blacktop. No backpack. No footprints she could recognize. No one nearby looking concerned. People walked past like everything was normal. Karen's heartbeat sped up in a way that felt wrong, unnatural, like her body already understood something her mind refused to accept. She scanned the lot again. Left, right, under the cars, between them. Emily wasn't hiding. She didn't play games like that. By 12:21 p.m., Karen was running toward the store entrance asking if anyone had seen a little blonde girl. Employees shook their heads. A cashier picked up the phone to call the manager. Someone suggested checking the restroom. Karen checked anyway. Empty. At 12:26, the manager called 911. 6 minutes after the call, the first patrol car arrived with lights off, tires crunching slowly over loose gravel near the curb.
Officer Daniel Ruiz stepped out with a notepad already in his hand. Missing children calls usually ended quickly. A kid wandering down an aisle, a misunderstanding, a neighbor who'd offered candy. He asked for the child's name, age, clothing, last known location. Karen answered each question in fragments, words breaking apart between breaths.
Yellow shirt, 6 years old. Right there. She was right there.
Ruiz walked the distance himself from the trunk to where the popsicle had fallen. 9 steps, maybe 10. Close enough that a parent could reach out and grab a child's hand without moving. He wrote the number down anyway. 10 steps, less than 15 seconds. That was all it had taken. And already the parking lot looked exactly the same as before. Cars parked neatly, carts rattling, sun glaring down. Nothing to suggest a 6-year-old girl had just disappeared into thin air. By 12:34 p.m., 3 patrol units had sealed off the grocery store parking lot with yellow tape and idling cruisers angled across the exits. Customers were asked to stay where they were. Engines were turned off. Doors remained open. The ordinary Saturday noise faded into something tense and unnatural, like the air itself had thickened. Officer Daniel Ruiz began moving vehicle to vehicle, knocking on windows, asking the same questions in the same order. Did you see a child alone? Did you see anyone approach her? Did you see a car leave quickly? Every answer was the same. No. 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 People remembered nothing. A red pickup had parked crooked. A woman had dropped her keys. Someone had been arguing on a cell phone. Details that meant nothing. No one remembered a little girl walking away. No one remembered anyone leading her by the hand. If a stranger had taken Emily Harper, they had done it quietly, casually, without urgency. The kind of movement that didn't draw attention, the kind people forget immediately. Karen sat on the curb beside her car with both hands covering her mouth as if holding something inside. Her mind replayed the last 30 seconds over and over. The popsicle, the cart, the trunk. She kept telling officers the same thing. She was right there. I could touch her. I just turned around. Every time she said it, the distance sounded smaller, shorter, more impossible. Ruiz measured it again with his own steps, 9 feet from the rear bumper to the passenger door. The child hadn't needed to cross the lot. Whoever took her had come to her. That detail stuck with him. At 12:41 p.m., the store manager handed over the security tapes. Grainy, black and white footage recorded onto an aging VHS system mounted above the office ceiling. Cameras covered the entrance and checkout lanes, but not the outer rows of the lot. Ruiz watched the tape anyway. At 12:18, Karen and Emily exited through the automatic doors. Emily skipped once beside her mother, backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders. They moved out of frame toward the side rows. At 12:23, Karen ran back alone. That was it. 5 minutes unaccounted for. 5 minutes with no cameras. 5 minutes that now felt like a hole in the world. At 12:49, the first canine unit arrived. A German shepherd named Atlas stepped out of the cruiser, ears alert, nails clicking against the pavement. Karen handed over Emily's backpack, which officers had retrieved from the ground beside the car. The dog sniffed it carefully, then circled the vehicle twice before pulling toward the space between 2 adjacent cars. Ruiz followed closely, watching the dog's body language. Atlas moved forward 3 steps, stopped, sniffed hard, then turned sharply toward the far end of the row. He tracked a faint path across the asphalt for maybe 20 feet. Then he hesitated, circled once, twice. His tail lowered. He sat. Trail lost. The handler tried again from a different angle. Same result. The scent didn't fade gradually the way it usually did when a child wandered off. It ended abruptly, like it had been lifted off the ground. Ruiz wrote the phrase down exactly as the handler said it. Sent terminates mid-lot. Possible vehicle. By 1:05 p.m., the lot was being photographed from every angle. Tire tracks, oil stains, candy wrappers, anything that didn't belong. But July heat softened the asphalt and blurred impressions quickly. Cars had been coming and going all morning. Nothing stood out. Nothing looked recent. If a vehicle had stopped near Emily, there was no clean mark left behind. The ground offered no help. Inside the store, a small group of employees stood near the registers whispering to each other. Most of them had kids. Most of them avoided looking at Karen. Parents understood too well what this meant. One cashier admitted she'd noticed a woman near the entrance earlier, someone she didn't recognize. Maybe late 30s, brown hair, sunglasses. But the description was vague, uncertain. She couldn't say if the woman had left with anyone. Couldn't even say what the woman wore. Memory collapses fast when nothing seems important at the time. At 1:17, Karen called her husband, Michael Harper, at work. Her voice broke halfway through the sentence. He left immediately, clocking out without explanation. The supervisor later confirmed the time. 1:19 p.m. Everything in the timeline lined up neatly, clinically. Too neat. Ruiz disliked timelines that clean. They meant there was no wiggle room, no hidden delay, just a small, precise gap where something terrible had happened. By 1:30, volunteers from nearby shops began spreading out across the surrounding blocks. They checked dumpsters, alleyways, playgrounds, the small wooded patch behind the pharmacy. Ruiz watched them form loose lines across the grass like a search party for a lost pet. It looked organized, hopeful. But he'd done this long enough to know something wasn't right. Children who wandered usually left trails, footprints, a dropped toy, a neighbor who'd seen them crying. This was different. Emily hadn't wandered. She had vanished. Michael arrived at 1:42, his truck screeching slightly as he braked too hard near the tape. He ran straight to Karen without asking permission, without waiting for instructions. Ruiz stepped aside. Some things didn't require protocol. Michael kept repeating the same question. Where was she? As if Karen might suddenly have an answer, as if the last hour had just been a misunderstanding. But the space beside the car was still empty. The orange popsicle stain had already dried into a faint smear on the asphalt. The sun kept shining. The store kept humming. And less than 30 minutes after a normal family grocery trip, an entire town was standing in a parking lot, staring at 9 feet of empty space, trying to understand how a child could disappear without anyone seeing a single thing. By 2:10 p.m., the search had moved beyond the grocery store parking lot and into the streets that surrounded Maple Street like spokes on a wheel. Patrol cars rolled slowly past trimmed lawns and white mailboxes. Officers stepping out every few houses to knock on doors and repeat the same questions in the same calm, measured voices. Did you see a little girl walking alone? Did you see anyone helping her? Did you notice a vehicle stopping suddenly? Most neighbors shook their heads before the questions were finished. It was Saturday afternoon. Lawnmowers, baseball on television, kids inside with cartoons. Nothing unusual, nothing memorable. The worst word in any missing child case wasn't no. It was nothing. Nothing seen, nothing heard, nothing out of place, nothing to follow. Ruiz wrote it again and again in his notebook until the words stopped looking real. Nothing. At 2:22, the sheriff authorized a formal perimeter, 2 miles in every direction. Intersections blocked. Officers stationed at the county roads leading out of town. Every car slowed and briefly inspected. Drivers asked if they had a child inside. Some people cooperated easily. Others grew irritated. A few offended. Ruiz understood both reactions. No one liked being suspected. But he also knew that if Emily Harper was in a car leaving town, every minute mattered more than anything else.
Time didn't pass evenly in cases like this. The first hour was worth 10 later ones. At 2:35, a helicopter from the state police circled overhead, the low thrum of rotor blades vibrating through the trees. From above, Oak Ridge looked small and exposed. Straight streets, open yards, no dense woods, no abandoned factories. Nowhere obvious for a child to hide. Ruiz watched the helicopter drift over the rooftops and thought the same thing he'd thought in the parking lot. Too open, too visible. If Emily had run off on her own, someone would have seen her. If she'd screamed, someone would have heard. The absence of witnesses wasn't comforting. It was wrong. At 2:48, a volunteer found something near the far edge of the lot behind the pharmacy. A single purple hair tie caught on a chain-link fence. The discovery caused a brief rush of energy, officers moving fast, radios crackling louder. Ruiz bagged it carefully and brought it to Karen. She stared at it for several seconds, then shook her head. Emily didn't wear purple. Hers were yellow or pink. The item was logged anyway, possible unrelated debris. It was the first object anyone had found all day, and it meant nothing. By 3:05, the sun had climbed higher and the asphalt heat shimmered across the streets. The popsicle stain near Karen's car had faded to almost nothing. Tire tracks blurred. Footprints disappeared. Evidence in small-town summer weather didn't last long. Ruiz noted the change quietly. Every minute that passed erased another chance at something useful. At 3:12, Ruiz sat with Karen and Michael in the shade beside the cruiser and walked through the timeline again. He spoke gently, like he was assembling a puzzle with pieces they'd already seen. You left the store at 12:18. You reached the car around 12:20. You opened the trunk. You turned around at 12:23. She was gone. Karen nodded each time, eyes fixed on the ground. Michael added small details. Emily had been humming. She'd asked if they could go to the park later. Ordinary things, the kind you never think will be the last memory. Ruiz circled the same number twice. 3 minutes. He'd worked cases where children slipped away for 10 or 15 and were still found a block away. 3 minutes wasn't enough time to walk far. Unless someone helped you. At 3:27, officers began canvassing businesses along Main Street. The barber shop, the hardware store, the diner with the flickering neon sign. Each owner checked their own cameras, most of them older systems that recorded in low resolution and overwrote themselves every few days. Footage showed cars passing, customers entering and leaving, but no small blonde girl. No adult guiding a child quickly down the sidewalk. If someone had taken Emily, they hadn't walked her openly through town. At 3:40, Ruiz reviewed the canine report again. Scent ended mid-lot. Possible vehicle pickup. He'd seen that phrase twice before in his career. Both times it meant the same thing. The child hadn't wandered. They hadn't hidden. They had been lifted, placed into something, gone faster than the eye could process. The realization settled heavy in his chest. This wasn't a search for a lost kid anymore. It was something else. Something deliberate. At 3:55, the first missing child alert was drafted. Emily Harper, age 6, blonde hair, blue eyes, pink backpack. Last seen at Oak Ridge Market parking lot. The words looked clinical, almost cold compared to the reality. Ruiz watched the printer spit out the page and felt the same quiet frustration he always did. A whole life reduced to a description and a timestamp. At 4:10, the flyers began going up on telephone poles and storefront windows. Volunteers taped them carefully, smoothing the corners like that small act might somehow help. Ruiz stepped back and looked at Emily's school photo printed in the center. Big smile. Gap between her front teeth. Hair slightly crooked like she'd brushed it herself. She looked like every kid he'd ever seen running through sprinklers or chasing fireflies. Ordinary. Safe. The kind of child you assume will always be fine. And yet, by late afternoon, dozens of officers, a helicopter, 2 dogs, and half the town had searched less than 2 square miles of open streets and yards. And still there was nothing. No witness, no direction, no trace. Just an empty space beside a silver sedan where a little girl had been standing 3 hours earlier. And a growing, quiet understanding among everyone involved that Emily Harper hadn't gotten lost. She had been taken. By early evening, the organized search began to slow, not because anyone wanted to stop, but because there was nowhere left to look. The same streets had been walked 3 times, the same drainage ditches checked twice, the same backyards scanned by neighbors with flashlights and quiet, worried expressions. At 5:20 p.m., the sun lowered just enough to cast long shadows across the Oak Ridge Market parking lot, stretching the light poles thin and crooked across the asphalt. The space between Karen Harper's car and the next vehicle looked smaller now. Ordinary. Harmless. Ruiz stood there again with his hands on his hips, staring at the exact spot where Emily had last been seen. 9 feet from the trunk. Less than 3 steps for an adult. He timed it himself. Turn, reach, grab, door open, inside, gone. Under 10 seconds. Fast enough that a parent loading groceries wouldn't notice. Fast enough that no one else would think twice. It didn't require force. It didn't require a scream. Just confidence. Just someone who didn't look dangerous. He'd seen it before. People didn't question normal. If a woman guided a child by the hand, most assumed it was a mother. If a man opened a van door and lifted a kid inside, people assumed it was family. Normal was invisible. And invisible was deadly. At 5:34, Michael insisted on helping with the search lines behind the store, even though deputies suggested he rest. He walked shoulder to shoulder with volunteers across the tall grass, calling Emily's name at regular intervals. His voice stayed steady, not loud, not frantic, just consistent. Ruiz noticed that. Parents often broke down or screamed themselves hoarse. Michael conserved energy like he expected to keep walking for hours, maybe days. Like some part of him already understood this wouldn't end quickly. At 5:48, the command post near the entrance had turned into something that felt more official. Folding tables, clipboards, maps with red marker circles, coffee cups collecting beside radios. The casual afternoon had transformed into procedure. Ruiz filled out the formal incident classification: missing child, suspicious circumstances, possible abduction. The last 2 words changed everything. They meant state investigators, media alerts, roadblocks farther out. They meant the clock was already working against them. At 6:02, Karen gave her full statement inside the store manager's office. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead while Ruiz recorded every word. She described Emily's voice, her clothes, the way she held the popsicle with both hands like it might fall. She described the exact second she turned back. I remember thinking we'd be home before 1. I remember wondering what to make for dinner. Then she wasn't there. Ruiz had heard hundreds of statements in his career, but they all shared the same detail. The parent always remembered something meaningless. Dinner plans, a song on the radio, the price of milk. The brain clung to the last normal thought before everything changed. At 6:15, officers expanded the canvass to registered sex offenders within 10 miles. Names printed, addresses checked, patrol units dispatched quietly one by one. Most were home, most confused. Most had alibis. Ruiz didn't expect an easy answer. Real life rarely matched lists. At 6:27, the helicopter made one final sweep before refueling. From above, the town looked almost peaceful. Trees glowing orange in the sunset, cars parked neatly in driveways, kids riding bikes like any other summer night. The pilot reported the same thing he had an hour earlier. No movement, no child matching the description, no one running through fields or hiding near the creek. If Emily was still nearby, she wasn't outside.
That thought landed heavier than Ruiz wanted to admit. At 6:40, the official decision came down. Organized search teams would pause at dark and resume at first light. It was standard protocol. Night searches in residential areas led to injuries and false sightings. Still, the words felt wrong saying them out loud. Pausing felt like quitting. Karen shook her head immediately when she heard, "We can't stop. What if she's cold? What if she's waiting for us?" Ruiz kept his voice low and even. "We're not stopping. We're just regrouping. We'll have more people in the morning, more dogs, more units." He'd given the same speech before. It never sounded convincing. At 7:05, the last volunteers drifted back to their cars. Engines started one at a time, headlights blinked on. The crowd thinned until only 2 cruisers remained in the lot. The grocery store closed early. The automatic doors shut with a hollow metallic sound that echoed longer than it should have. Ruiz walked the row of cars one more time with a flashlight, checked under bumpers, between tires, along the fence line. Nothing. No dropped shoe, no backpack strap, no fabric caught anywhere. It was like Emily had never been there at all. At 7:22, Karen and Michael finally left the lot, not because they wanted to, but because there was nothing else to do. Ruiz watched their car disappear down Maple Street and felt the familiar weight settle in his chest. The first day was over. 12 hours since a little girl stood in bright sunlight holding a popsicle beside her mother. 12 hours of dogs, helicopters, officers, neighbors, and maps. And all they had to show for it was a melted orange stain on asphalt and a timeline with a 3-minute hole no one could explain. The town grew quiet again as darkness settled over Oak Ridge. Porch lights flicked on. Crickets started up in the grass. From a distance, everything looked normal, peaceful, safe. But somewhere between 12:20 and 12:23 that afternoon, something had stepped into that ordinary moment and taken a child without leaving a single trace behind. And now, as night fell, Emily Harper was still missing. By the second morning, the search no longer looked like a volunteer effort. It looked like an operation. At 5:42 a.m., before the sun cleared the tree line, state police cruisers rolled back into the Oak Ridge Market lot one by one, headlights cutting through the early gray light. A mobile command trailer parked near the entrance, folding antennas extended toward the sky, radios tested, clipboards stacked, coffee poured into paper cups that steamed in the cool air. The casual urgency of Saturday had hardened into something methodical, something colder. Emily Harper had now been missing for 17 hours. Ruiz arrived just after 6 and checked the updated board inside the trailer. Missing juvenile, possible abduction, Amber Alert authorized statewide. The printer beside the desk spat out bulletins with her photo and description in block letters. Height, weight, blonde hair, yellow shirt. Last seen 12:23 p.m. Oak Ridge Market. He noticed they had removed the word maybe from every report. There was no maybe anymore. No one believed she'd wandered off. At 6:18, 2 additional canine units began fresh tracks from the exact spot near Karen's car. Morning air sometimes held scent better than heat. The handlers worked slowly, carefully, trying to avoid contamination. One dog circled tight around the trunk, then pulled toward the same lane Atlas had followed the day before. 15 feet, 20, 30, then the same result. Stop, confusion, sit. Trail ended. The handler said it quietly, almost apologetically, like he wished the ground would cooperate. Ruiz wrote the phrase again. Scent lifted, consistent with vehicle. At 6:40, detectives started reconstructing every vehicle that had been in the lot between noon and 12:30 the previous day. Receipts, credit card transactions, witness lists. Anyone who had shopped during that window would be contacted. Names filled the board fast. 47 customers, 8 employees, 3 delivery drivers. It sounded like progress on paper. Ruiz knew most of them would lead nowhere. Ordinary people, ordinary errands. But somewhere in that list, one person didn't belong. At 7:05, a pair of detectives knocked on doors along Maple Street with printed still images from the security camera, grainy outlines of cars entering and exiting the front of the lot. They asked residents if any vehicle looked familiar. Most shook their heads. The pictures were too blurry to mean anything. A sedan could be any sedan. A van could be any van. In 1997, cameras didn't capture details. They captured shapes. At 7:22, Ruiz drove the likely routes out of town himself. 2 main roads, 1 highway entrance, 1 narrow county road that cut through farmland. He timed the drive. From the parking lot to the highway ramp took under 4 minutes at normal speed. Less if you didn't care about the limit. If someone had grabbed Emily and driven straight out, they could have been miles away before Karen even called 911. The math was simple. It was also discouraging. At 7:48, Karen and Michael returned to the lot. They hadn't slept. Ruiz could see it in their faces, eyes red, skin pale. They moved like people underwater, slow, heavy. Karen carried a stack of fresh flyers and started taping them to every pole she could find, even though deputies had already covered most surfaces. It gave her something to do. Ruiz led her. Activity felt better than sitting still. At 8:10, local news vans began lining the street. Satellite dishes unfolded. Reporters spoke into cameras with serious expressions. Missing child stories traveled fast, especially in towns like Oak Ridge, where nothing else ever happened. Ruiz watched Karen answer questions with a voice that cracked halfway through each sentence. "Please bring her home. Please." She didn't accuse anyone, didn't blame anyone, just repeated the same request. Like saying it enough times might make it true. By mid-morning, tips started coming in. Someone saw a girl matching the description near a gas station 30 miles south. Another caller claimed they saw a child crying in the back of a white van on the interstate. Each lead was logged and dispatched. Each one dissolved within hours. Wrong child, wrong vehicle, wrong time. Ruiz watched the board fill with crossed-out lines. False hope had its own kind of weight. It lifted you for a second, then dropped you harder than before. At 10:05, detectives interviewed every store employee again, slower this time. Not just what they saw, what they felt. Anything unusual. One stock clerk mentioned a woman asking where the restroom was. Another remembered someone lingering near the carts. Details too small to matter yesterday suddenly sounded important. Ruiz wrote everything down anyway. Most of it would be nothing, but sometimes nothing turned into something later. At 11:12, the sun climbed higher and the parking lot began to look normal again. Cars returned, customers parked where crime scene tape had been hours earlier. Life resumed because life always resumed. Ruiz stood near the same row of spaces and felt a strange disconnect. Yesterday, this place had been the center of everything. Now it was just a grocery store again. People buying bread, kids asking for candy. The world moving forward like nothing had happened. He'd seen that before, too. Tragedy rarely stopped anyone except the family it belonged to. By noon, exactly 24 hours after Emily Harper had stepped out of the store holding a melting popsicle, there was still nothing concrete. No witness, no suspect, no direction of travel, just paperwork, maps, and a growing silence where answers should have been. And Ruiz knew something he didn't say out loud. When a child vanished this cleanly, this quietly, it usually meant one thing. Someone had planned it. Someone had waited. And someone had left that parking lot knowing exactly what they were doing. By the third day, the search no longer felt loud. It felt tired. The first 48 hours had been filled with sirens and helicopters and volunteers moving shoulder to shoulder across fields like they could physically push the answer out of the ground. But by Monday morning, the energy had thinned into something quieter, more deliberate. Fewer people showed up at dawn. Fewer cars lined the Oak Ridge market lot. The folding tables were still there, the maps still taped down, but the crowd had shrunk to deputies, detectives, and the same handful of locals who refused to leave. Emily Harper had now been missing for 68 hours. Ruiz had slept maybe 3 of them. He shaved in the station bathroom sink, changed shirts, and came back to the command trailer with the same coffee he didn't really taste. The board inside looked different,
Less chaotic, neater. Columns labeled witnesses, vehicles, tips, cleared. Most of the columns were already filled with check marks. Cleared, cleared, cleared. It should have felt like progress. It didn't. Every cleared lead was just another door closing. At 6:12 a.m., the FBI liaison arrived from Columbus. 1 sedan, 1 briefcase. A man named Keller who spoke softly and asked precise questions. He didn't rush, didn't speculate. Just reviewed everything Ruiz had written over the past 2 days like he was solving a math problem. Timeline first. 12:23, last sighting. 12:24, mother returns. 12:31, 911 call. Keller circled the same 7-minute gap Ruiz had stared at since Saturday. "That's your window," he said. "Everything happened here." Ruiz nodded. He already knew. Hearing someone else say it didn't make it easier. By 7:05, they began pulling security from outside the lot. Not just the store, the gas station across the street, the bank on the corner, even the traffic camera 2 blocks down. 1997 footage meant VHS tapes and bad angles and timestamps that drifted minutes off real time. Still, it was something. Ruiz sat at a folding table with a small TV and watched cars roll by in grainy gray. Minutes stretched. Sedans, pickups, nothing unusual. He forced himself not to blink too long. People always missed things when they got tired. At 8:17, Keller paused the tape, rewound, played again. A light-colored van turned right past the bank at 12:29. Boxy, older model, no side windows. It didn't mean anything by itself. Half the county drove vans like that. But it was the first vehicle leaving the area within minutes of the disappearance. Ruiz wrote it down anyway. Possible interest. White or tan cargo van, direction eastbound. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had all weekend. At 9:02, officers began canvassing neighborhoods farther out. Not asking if anyone saw Emily, that question had already been asked 100 times. Now they asked different ones. Anyone new move in recently? Any unfamiliar vehicles parked overnight? Any houses with blinds always closed? It felt intrusive, almost paranoid, but experience taught Ruiz something simple. Kids weren't usually taken far. They were taken close and hidden plain. At 10:30, Karen came back again. Same clothes as yesterday, same folder of flyers, now wrinkled at the edges. She didn't ask for updates right away. She just stood near Ruiz's cruiser and watched the parking lot like she expected to see Emily run out between cars. Parents did that. They kept looking at the last place they saw their child, like reality might rewind if they stared hard enough. Ruiz finally walked over and told her about the van. He kept his voice careful, not hopeful, not bleak, just factual. "It might be nothing," he said. She nodded too fast. "But it might not," she replied. Her hands shook while she said it. He realized hope was more dangerous than despair. Hope made every shadow look like a miracle. By noon, the volunteers had mostly gone back to work, back to school, back to regular life. The yellow tape came down from half the lot. Shopping carts rolled again. Engines started. Doors slammed. Normal sounds. Ruiz hated that part most. The world continuing like nothing had broken. Inside the trailer, Keller mapped a circle on the county grid, 10 miles out from Oak Ridge. "Statistically," he said, tapping the center, "if she's alive, she's inside this." Ruiz stared at the circle. Farms, empty houses, old barns, hundreds of places someone could hide a child without anyone noticing for days. The number of possibilities felt suffocating. At 1:14 p.m., they received a call from a retired teacher who lived 2 streets over. She remembered something small. Saturday afternoon, around 12:30, she'd noticed a van parked along her curb for just a minute or two. She'd thought it was someone checking directions, didn't think anything of it. Light color, no logos, the same direction as the bank camera. Ruiz felt his pulse pick up for the first time all day. 2 sightings didn't make a suspect, but coincidences stacked eventually. At 2 o'clock, they drove the route she described. It led straight to the highway bypass. No stoplights, no congestion. A clean exit. Ruiz pictured it in his head. Someone walking calmly to the van, door sliding shut, engine starting, no one looking twice. In broad daylight. In the middle of town. The simplicity of it made him angry. Not because it was clever, because it was easy. At 3:30, they entered the van into the statewide alert. Every patrol unit now watching for it, every trooper scanning traffic. It still felt thin. A description so common it barely narrowed anything. But for the first time since Saturday, Ruiz wasn't staring at a blank page anymore. He had a direction, a shape, something to chase. And as the afternoon sun dipped lower over Oak Ridge, he realized something else. Whoever took Emily hadn't panicked. They hadn't run. They had driven away like it was just another day, like they had done this before. And that thought scared him more than anything they'd found so far. By the 4th day, the town stopped whispering and started watching. Oak Ridge had never been a place where strangers blended in. People noticed unfamiliar cars. They noticed out-of-state plates. They noticed when the same vehicle drove past twice in an hour. Now every light-colored van looked suspicious. Every delivery truck drew stares. Deputies parked at intersections longer than necessary. Gas station clerks memorized faces. The case had shifted from chaos to focus, from searching everywhere to searching one thing: the van. Ruiz slept in the station that night on a vinyl couch with his boots still on. At 5:48 a.m., the phone on the wall rang. Not the main line, the direct one from dispatch. The kind that only rang when something mattered. He was awake before the second ring. Ruiz? Trooper Hale, Route 41 bypass. We might have your vehicle. Ruiz was already moving, keys in hand, heart racing in a way it hadn't since Saturday. Talk to me. Older cargo van, beige or white, no windows on the sides, parked behind an abandoned grain warehouse near mile marker 12. Been sitting here since at least 4:30, according to a trucker who stopped for coffee. Ruiz didn't ask anything else. He just said, "Don't approach," and hung up. The warehouse sat 2 miles outside town where the fields flattened and the road curved toward nothing. A long, rusted structure that hadn't stored grain since the early 80s. Most people drove past without noticing it. Ruiz arrived in 8 minutes. 2 cruisers already blocking the access road. Hale standing beside his unit, binoculars in hand. The van sat alone near the back fence like it had been left there on purpose. Plain, quiet, unremarkable. The kind of vehicle you could pass 100 times without remembering. Ruiz felt something cold settle in his stomach, because this wasn't random parking. It was hidden. They approached slow, weapons low but ready, gravel crunching under boots, too loud in the morning air. The driver door was closed, no movement inside. Ruiz tried the handle. Locked. Hale circled to the back and froze. "You need to see this." Ruiz stepped around. The rear doors were chained. Not professionally, just hardware store chain looped through the handles, cheap padlock. The kind meant to keep kids out of tool sheds. His pulse hammered in his ears. He cut the lock with bolt cutters from the trunk of the cruiser. The chain fell. The doors opened with a tired metallic groan. The van smelled like dust and gasoline and something else underneath. Something stale. Inside were blankets, a cooler, 2 empty water bottles, a stuffed animal on the floor.
Small, pink, a rabbit with one ear bent. Ruiz didn't breathe for a second. He recognized it immediately from Karen's living room photos, Emily's favorite. But the van was empty. No child, no person, just the imprint in the blankets where someone small had been sitting. Recently. He touched the fabric, still warm from the sun. Not from a body, but not days old either, maybe hours. They secured the scene fast, forensics, photos, fingerprints. Hale found fast food wrappers dated yesterday, a half sandwich, a juice box. Ruiz stared at it and pictured a 4-year-old drinking from that straw, sitting quietly, waiting, maybe crying, maybe not understanding anything. That image hit harder than anything else because it meant she'd been alive and close. By 7:30, they were sweeping the warehouse itself. The side door hung open slightly. Inside smelled like rust and old hay. Footprints in the dust, fresh ones, adult, and smaller ones beside them. Ruiz followed the trail across the concrete floor past broken pallets and empty sacks. The prints led to a storage room at the back, door half shut. His hand trembled just enough that he noticed. He pushed it open slow. The room was dark except for one cracked window, and there, sitting on an overturned bucket hugging her knees, was a small blonde girl in a sunflower t-shirt. Dirty, tear-streaked, but alive. She looked up at the light like it hurt her eyes. Ruiz lowered his weapon instantly, voice softer than he thought he was capable of. "Hey, sweetheart, what's your name?" She hesitated, like she wasn't sure if she should answer, then whispered, "Emily." He felt something break loose in his chest. "Yeah," he said gently. "We've been looking for you." She didn't run, didn't cry, just stared like she'd been too scared for too long to react. He wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and carried her out. Outside, Hale turned away for a second and wiped his eyes like dust had gotten in them. Dispatch called Karen before Ruiz even finished the paperwork. He heard the scream through the phone from 6 feet away. Not pain. Relief. The kind that empties a person completely. 30 minutes later, Karen's car slid into the gravel lot too fast. She didn't even shut the door. Just ran. Ruiz stepped aside, didn't say anything, didn't need to. Emily looked confused for half a second, then something clicked. Recognition that had survived fear and time. "Mommy?" Karen dropped to her knees and held her like the world might try to steal her again if she loosened her grip. Ruiz turned away to give them privacy. The morning sun hit the fields the same way it had every other day. Birds still moving, wind still blowing. Ordinary, like nothing historic had happened. Keller walked up beside him quietly. "You ever notice," he said, "how it's never dramatic when you find them? No music, no big moment, just there they are." Ruiz nodded, because that was the truth. After days of noise and sirens and fear, rescue was quiet. Simple. Almost gentle. Later, they caught the man 2 counties over trying to hitch a ride. Drifter, prior record. Van registered under a fake name. He hadn't even made it far. Most kidnappers didn't. They just thought they would. But Ruiz didn't care about him. Not really. What mattered was that a little girl was going home. That night, Oak Ridge felt different. Not healed, but lighter. Porch lights still on, doors still double-checked, but people smiled at each other again. Ruiz drove past Oak Ridge Market once more before heading home. Same parking lot, same carts, same sunlight. Only now there was a small missing poster peeling off the window. Someone had written across it in marker. Found. Safe. And beneath that, in shaky handwriting, 2 words that mattered more than anything else. Thank you. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone, somewhere, may still be waiting to be heard.